way artificial intelligence works, and maybe I'll pause here and explain. I'm really talking about large language models. Large language
Yeah.
models really are doing prediction.
Picture of yourself doing something random is actually generating a picture of yourself doing something random because they could do anything that
And
they
yeah,
wanted.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're
And
right.
so, what are your thoughts on this copyright issue?
These are thorny questions, and we don't have all the answers. And even the answers we do have are not very good right now. And the reason is very simple. Copyright and intellectual property in general comes from the era before generative AI. So, generative AI is introducing a completely new paradigm to the world, which the legal processes have not yet caught up with. So, I remember um, emojis, the smileys and the thumbs up and all that. They've been around for a long, long time. It's only recently in some jurisdictions that emojis are being recognized as being a way to formally indicate agreement. So if someone sends you a letter or a contract or something, and you respond with a heart emoji or a smiley emoji, it indicates that you agree with the content. If you respond with a frowning emoji or some other emoji that indicates that you're not happy, the law is not fully caught up with it, but they're beginning to recognize that, hey, look, this is a way of reacting that should be recognized. I think it was last year or maybe the year before, I can't remember exactly when, the New York Times sued OpenAI, the
Oh,
company that
yeah.
is behind ChatGPT, because OpenAI took all of the New York Times content that was on the internet and used it to train their model. New York Times said, hey, look, you can't do that. This is our intellectual property, and that case is still on. There's all kinds of ability to take someone's voice and image and superimpose it, and people, bad characters, let me say, are using that for bad purposes. They're taking images of famous people and producing deep fake. We call them deep fake now,
Yeah,
where
deep fake.
it's virtually impossible to tell that this is not the person saying what they're saying or doing what they're doing. They're using it to harass, especially women. Let me be honest that you can find someone who's a famous personality, find videos of them doing things that maybe are illegal or that are immoral, and it's completely fake. They never did that in actual fact. They never said those things. They never. That is one of the bad sides of the technology, where people who don't mean well can
Yeah.
use the same tools that you use for your homework or for your coding. They use the same tools for bad purposes, or they use it to harass people or do things that are illegal. We can think about, for instance, in the crypto world, where
Yeah.
people use cryptocurrency to do illegal things, and stuff like that. My take on it is that the technology is moving so fast that law cannot really catch up with them, with it rather,
Yeah.
at the pace it's moving, because the way society is set up, law is slow, and it takes its time to consider what to do and all that. So law is never going to catch up with technology. Um, but as individuals who mean well, who are good actors, we have a responsibility to use the technology for good. One, recognizing that it, like everything in life, has two sides. I also believe that the companies that are putting out the tools that people are using have to do a better job at recognizing the harm that can be caused. So, unfortunately, capitalism, the system, the economic system we use, doesn't really reward people for doing things that are for the good of the whole. So, if I think of car manufacturers, for many years they did not have seat belts in the cars. They did not have, you know, um, lights and things, safety features. The government had to come in and mandate and regulate them. Look, you've got to have seatbelts and make it illegal not to wear seatbelts when you're driving, because we know that if you're wearing a seatbelt when you're driving a vehicle, if you get into an accident, you have a much better chance of being unhurt than if you're not wearing a seatbelt. And so I think that, to answer your question, there's a room for regulation. There's a room for the government, or actually, not just for the government and the companies and us as individuals, to recognize that you need guardrails. You cannot have people driving at 150 miles an hour on city streets where pedestrians are walking, other road users, cyclists. There has to be a speed limit
Yeah.
for everybody's safety. So I think it's the same thing. Now, I'm not naive. That's not the world we live in today, but that's the world we must advocate for. That, if you are, and I'll name them, if you're Google or Meta or, OpenAI or Anthropic, you're putting out a very powerful tool. It's part of your responsibility to inform people about the safe use of this technology, to the extent that you can put in the guardrails so that the model doesn't hallucinate as much, so
Yeah.
that the model can't be used freely to any extent to do anything, because that's the nature of the model. The model itself does not have any morality, it does not have any ethics. And so it is us as human beings, it is us as the people behind the companies, behind the technology, who have to say, hey, look, we can't give, you know, powerful tools to people without showing them how to use it, without showing them how to be responsible with it. I wouldn't, for instance, give a loaded gun to an underage person who has had no training.
Yeah.
That's not Second Amendment. That's recklessness. Because, to use that tool to safely do sport or protect yourself or whatever, you got to know how to use it. You got to be trained. So I think that there's a responsibility definitely on all of us, the government, the companies, us individuals, entrepreneurs, people who run think tanks and all that, to contribute to making this safer for everybody, because it's not safe. You can have, or let me rephrase that, we shouldn't have a situation where people's privacy can be invaded, and especially for women, because you're a young woman yourself. We can have deep fakes of them being harassed, of teenagers being bullied. All those, to me, are wrong uses of technology. But like, it's like a knife. You can use it to cut food and prepare a good meal, or you can use it to cut off your finger and have blood all over the kitchen floor. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a long answer. It's not perfect, but neither is the world we live in.
Yeah, that's true. You did answer my question. I feel like people might. use it for good and use it for bad, and we do need to set AI ethics. But what I'm more worried about is the biasy of Gen AI and what it can mean for the future. For example, I feel like there's not too long ago, or maybe it was long ago, I'm not really sure. Amazon used AI to look at like people's resumes and stuff and decide if they were good to hire or if they weren't. And you would think because AI is basically um, it's a machine, it doesn't have any personal preferences, that it would not be biased at all. But it was completely biased, and I think it didn't choose any women at all. Because yes, men were more likely to get a job, but it didn't mean that women couldn't get it too. And that's basically what happened. And what I'm saying is, if AI is especially in the future, Gen AI is going to become biased and actually is going to be flawed by human flaws.
Actually,
It,
I wouldn't even say that it's in the future. I think it's now.
yeah,
And
now.
the reason is that the world itself is biased. Okay,
Yes.
so if you think about how generative AI works, it's trained on a large body of content. Let me put it that way. That content contains bias because the content reflects the world. So if you think, usually, initially when the tests came out, and AI was asked to identify um, people who were criminals, look at 10,000 pictures, disproportionately identify Black people, with that negative connotation, when in fact the data shows that doesn't show that. So I'm not saying that crime is of one race exclusively, but in fact the reason that the AI came out with that result initially is because of the bias in the world. The data itself contains what we call inherent biases. The data contains, you know, assumptions about the state of affairs, which the programmers have to correct for. So it's a responsibility of the person who's training the model to be aware that you cannot just take real world data, and store it in stick it in the program and say have at it. You must put the guardrails on it. You must test it that, okay, in the real world, does this discriminate against women? Does it discriminate against minorities? Does it discriminate against white people? Does it discriminate against white men? Because in the real world, those biases exist. That is a fact. There's a lot of sociological data that, for example, shows that when um, hiring managers receive resumes in this country where the name sounds like that of a Black person, they are less likely to get a call. And the same resume with the same qualifications, the same job experience, and all that, if the name sounds like a white person, they are more likely to get a call. It's not that the hiring managers are bad people, it's that the world itself is not free of bias. That's something that we know in sociology, but we don't like to admit it. We think, oh, everything is fair and just and all that. It's not true. There are systemic um, problems with the world as it is. That's just a reality, because that's the way it is. As human beings, we do have those biases, and the world reflects. When we're making systems that mimic the world, that take real world data and extrapolate, because really that's what AI is doing. It takes it and says, okay, based on these 5 tokens, the 6th token is likely to be this. And the probability is, in the 90th percentile that it's correct. But what I'm saying is those five tokens themselves are not perfect. So in training and in the use, we as consumers of the technology, as users of the technology, as creators of the products of that technology, we need to be aware that in fact this tool is not perfect. We need to be aware that in fact, as we put the prompt, we need to say in the prompt the guardrails that I want it to be XYZ. I want it to reflect so if you're making, let's go back to the example, you're making a game,
Hmm.
I want it to reflect fairness and equity, because the prompt language allows you to say virtually anything you want. You can, many of the models, like ChatGPT, I'll just use that as an example, allow you to pre-instruct the model and say, when you're um, responding to my prompts, use this context. And so, in that pre-training, in that modeling, you can specify the guardrails you want. You can say, I want this game to fairly reflect a gender balance. I don't want it to be biased against whatever minorities your favorite or marginalized group you don't want to marginalize it. And so that responsibility uh, for producing fair outcomes, to me, falls on us as the users and creators of the technology. Because, like I said several minutes ago, the technology itself is agnostic. It has no consciousness. Even though it looks like it has consciousness, it doesn't. It has no ethics, even though it looks like, it's supposed to be fair and all that. Which is why, you get results that are in the real world very problematic.
Yeah. So, I understand what you're talking about. Like, AI has a bit is biased, doesn't have ethics when people think it is. And speaking of that, I was wondering about the future of AI, Gen AI specifically. How does that? How will that look like? Do you think the future? And like, let's just say 50 years from now.
Even in the next 10 years, it's going to be a lot more powerful, a lot more capable. So today, what we have are models that can basically solve office work almost to a T. Anything that you could do with personal computers of those days in an office white collar environment, they're not so good at replicating real world. So, for example, driverless cars, the technology is not yet at a point where it's safe, that it would recognize, okay, this is a dog trying to cross the street, so I shouldn't cross the dog. Or in a bad case, I have a choice, either kill the pedestrian human or kill the animal. You know, I think in the next 10 years, we're going to solve a lot of those kinds of problems because the training data will be much larger. And we, as the programmers, as the companies, will understand much better how to train those ethics into the software. Because, you know, uh, let me use a big word, it's deodontics, basically, where you have rules. Deodontics is a big word for rules, and you can make a lot of rules. And because the computers are so efficient, even if there's 10 million rules, it can go through all of them and take a decision tree, and in microseconds come up with what the rules predict the answer should be. The problem is you cannot know what all the rules are in advance for every situation you come up with. But I think we'll get better and better. So I expect in the next 10 years, we'll see better technology for instance, driverless cars. We'll see more creative uses of the technology, even in things like exploring our natural world. We live on a planet that is so beautiful, that is so big. We haven't explored 5% of the depths of the oceans.
Yeah.
That stuff that machines can go down there, just like we go into outer space, can go down there and bring us the information and the resources that are down there. There are a lot of resources buried in the oceans, which I think in the next 10 years we'll see the use of artificial intelligence helping us to exploit those resources. I think another big part of it is even the refinements in the white collar work that we're doing. There's a lot of hype about it destroying jobs and all that. And personally, I don't share that fear, because it's like when car engines were invented, all the people who used to be who used to work rather as the guys who drove the horses and the buggies, they all lost their jobs. But guess what? The cars and the internal combustion engine created a lot more jobs than they destroyed. And I think that in the next 10 years, we'll see a lot more um, creativity. There'll be new jobs that do not exist today. So today, everybody wants to be a content creator. Everybody wants to
Yeah.
be, um, a programmer and all that. But like the experience you had with trying to create your game, AI will get to the point where it eliminates a lot of the um, rote jobs. Let me put it that way, even in programming. But that frees us as human beings because we have imagination, we have creativity. It will create other jobs that will replace the existing jobs. I don't think of it in terms of The Simpsons. The Simpsons TV show where, in the future, you didn't do anything; it just brought you your meal and instantly. That's not my perspective of the future. My perspective of the future is one that's richer, that's more comfortable. AI will help us to do things like modeling solutions to climate change. It'll help us to more intelligently explore our world and space and the depths of the oceans. And those things will give us the opportunity to live richer, fuller, more enjoyable lives. So I'm optimistic about AI and the future.
Nice. Well, thanks for being on my podcast. This is AI with Alex, and I'm Alex. This is Yomi. And do you have any last words before we end the podcast?
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Alex. I am
Thank you.
inspired by your interest in this subject. And I think you are a perfect example of why I'm so confident in the future. If at your young age, you have this interest in the technology and in making it better, more efficient, and all that, I'm confident that you and others like you will create the solutions that will benefit all of us. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks everybody for listening to my podcast. Make sure to like this podcast and subscribe so you get notified when I post a new podcast. And also make sure to share with family members and friends. And as always, I'm Alex and I will see you later.